Welcome to the 59th episode of the Learning Explorer podcast. This time we have again an English episode, and our guest today is Daniel Hong from Area 9, and we will talk together about the topic of skill-based learning and explore what it is and how it connects, for example, to the topic of skill-based organization. And with this, let's enjoy this episode. Hi Daniel, nice that you are here with us today at the Learning Explorer podcast. You have been guest before in an episode some time ago. This time it was German language, but this time we decided to do it in English. So for the ones who don't like English, maybe you look at the transcript later on. And before we start into the discussion, Daniel, do you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Matthias, thanks for inviting me again. And I'm Daniel Hong. I'm working as a learning solutions architect at Area 9 since 2019, which is also the point in time where Area 9 has really started to venture into the German-speaking market with their product services. And so I'm happy to be one of the first members of the team and have also seen a couple of ups and also challenges that we have seen on the road, and happy to share some experiences today.
Great. And today we will talk about skill-based learning. And before we dive into the topic, I always like to ask my guests about the quote that they brought with them.
Yes, I have been searching for a quote that really captures the topic well, and I found one by Miriam Bamberger. She's the member of the AXA European Management Committee, and she wrote a LinkedIn article about skills, and I found it very interesting what she said about skills. So let me quote: "Skills are the currency of the future, not jobs. The challenge is that skills have become like bottled water. They have a shelf life of 2 or 3 years, and the date by which your skills expire comes rather sooner than later." So what I really loved about the quote is that we're not only talking about skills as the new currency, bringing or sunsetting the idea of jobs, but also that skills are not fixed. They're really fluent. They're in flux. And so I think those are two aspects of a very complex topic that I hope we can shed a bit more light on today.
Yeah, definitely. And I also know that many people wrote about half-life of skills before, so that they will be not valuable, some of them at least in some areas, not valuable in the near future. I think some have longer shelf life or half-lives than others, even though there is not a real scientific background on this half-life type of argument. There's still some truth in it that they will be some skills will be of lower relevance in the near future. That I fully agree there. And this brings me also to basically the first question, and it's a good segue over there, because everyone talks nowadays about skills. This LinkedIn article, we are talking now about skills, and I've seen many people mixing up things. There are sometimes very diverse definitions of it. So can you tell us first what's your position on it, your perspective on it? What is a skill?
Let's definitely start to define the rules of the game, so to say, right?
Yeah.
So, and maybe sometimes it's helpful to start with what something is not. And so our listeners and definitely me have also heard a lot of different terms. One is skill, one is competency. And what I really loved about a definition that I came across a couple of weeks ago in a book called Skills Powered Organization by Ravi Jesuthasan and Tanush Kapilash-Rami. So they said competency is defined as knowledge, behaviors, attitudes, and even skills that lead to the ability to do something successfully or efficiently, right? So, and they said an example would be making business decisions would be a competency. But then skills is an element of that competency. So it's not competency equals skills, but skills is an element of that broader term of competency.
Yeah.
And so they define a skill as a means or a framework or a means to capture an individual's skills.
Yeah.
So, and they decide that they also differentiate between a theoretical ability to execute a task. So it's a cognitive part. And then they also define it as their expression of those skills in the form of capabilities. So they have two parts or two elements inside the term skills. One is the theoretical part, the theoretical ability, and then, of course, the actual doing, the capability that result in the proficient execution of work. So that I found that really helpful because competencies are much broader. And if you want to have a working horse definition, you want to have something that you can really compare and also define. So found that really helpful.
I also like this, and knowing that a competency is just a part of a competency, a skill is just a part of a competency is very important, and that there are even more things into a competency than in a skill. There's mindset, there's a behavior, there's motivation potentially, because else I don't see someone acting competent, even if they have a skill. And but in learning, what would you focus on, right? Can we really develop a competency? Yes, over time, most probably, but a smaller, more granular part to work on is a skill, right? So this also brings us most probably then to skill-based learning, right?
And maybe just to add, for the record, there are different approaches to this, right? We have organizations that say, look, we want to tackle competencies. And there are frameworks like the 4-dimensional framework by Charles Fadell. He's the head of the Center for Curriculum Redesign, works at Harvard University. And he says, look, we have knowledge, which is what we know and understand. And then we have skills, how we use what we know. And then we have also character, which he describes as how we behave and engage in the world. And he says things like mindfulness, curiosity, courage. Those are character elements. And then you have something which is, I think, distinctive to his approach. He calls it meta-learning. So how we reflect, how we adapt. And he would say it's distinctive from skills. But then, of course, the two authors that I cited a couple of minutes ago would say, well, this is part of skills, right? They call it enabler skills, like soft skills. So growth mindset would be, of course, a mindset, but would be also part of a skill. So there are different approaches out there. And I'm not saying that this is the silver bullet, but I think it's always important to define the terms by which we're playing, right?
Yeah, and to understand that there's more than just one definition potentially, and there's more than just talking about skills. Like this, with this example, you also started with knowledge, and many people think learning is acquiring knowledge, which is the first step in learning. On the other hand side, you also mentioned the meta level. So there are also something called meta competencies that you build on other competencies that most probably have a very long shelf life that support you in all learning processes, and accelerate your skill building most probably, but most probably also very difficult to influence.
Exactly.
So I also saw in one presentation once a very nice picture, which maybe is also too small from a learning professional from IKEA. Tatevik is her name, and she said a very simple picture. Skills are very small, and if you have a large backpack on your back with many of the skills bundled together, then it's beginning to be a competency. In your picture, maybe there are still some pieces missing, like the behavior and mindset and so on. And on other tools, sometimes they don't structure it at all. In some learning tools, I've seen it. Like sometimes it's mixed mindset, knowledge pieces, and so on. And what I also think it makes it very difficult is you can have skills at very different levels. So you can very small granular skills like in IT I can say I can write a loop in Python. You can also have a level above it, saying I'm able to program, but I could also say, even above, I have IT fluency or literacy, or I could say I can do machine learning, but to what degree and so on. So this is really also making it even more difficult, and depends most probably from my point of view, what's the target for the skill. So do I want to upskill? Then it should be more a smaller piece from my point of view. But if I do an analysis or a skill analysis for my organization, maybe I need a different flight level to not collect 5,000 individual different skills.
And that's, I think, already bringing it to the core of the topic, because what we have seen, what I've personally seen in the space of skill-based learning is really at least two different philosophies or two different schools. And it really depends on where you're going or what your target is, as you said. And I've called it, one is the learn from the legends approach, and the other one is data is your best friend. And so let's start with the second one, right? Usually, or a lot of vendors out there, they say, look, we have AI, and you have a lot of internal data, like the Scrum projects and the job ads that you have internal, but also the external data, which is a lot of portfolio, LinkedIn job ads, whatever you have there, right? And so let's use AI to analyze all this data and then translate it into skills, right? And so you're going from predefined knowledge, which is out there, using AI in databases, identify key skills, and then design the training to come to upskilling, reskilling, right? That's one approach. And I think what I've seen so far is that organizations like to use it because first, it's handy, it's fast, and of course, it yields results when it comes to reporting, right? You want to see, okay, how many skills do I have in my organization? How many people are skilled in Python, right? And then I can see it's 65 people in Python, but it's helpful, right? At the same time, what I've seen also is what I call the learn from legends approach, where you distill the expertise from those who excel. And so you observe high performance, and then those high performers, you bring them together and say, look, if you want to perform very, very well in this job, in this skill, or in this skill area, or in this job, right? Then what you need to do. And they say from their experience, these are the skills and these are the tasks that you need to be fluent in. And then you design the trainings from there. And it's a completely different approach, right? You might use AI, but you can also do it without AI completely, because this is a different approach. And what I've seen is also that this is not mutually exclusive. You can use both approaches, but I think there's different targets to it. And if you're going more, gearing it more towards performance and output, I guess the bringing in the legends and then really ask them what are the top skills that you need and what are these skills looking like. They probably will go more granular, whereas the data is your best friend approach is rather tends to be high level, where you have, okay, I have Python as a skill, but as you said, what does that mean, right? And I heard one example where people say, I am a pianist. And then what does it mean to be a pianist? Can you play in the Philharmonie in Hamburg, or can you play in your home and nobody listens to it, right? So it's very, very different levels.
Exactly. And I like both approaches because both have, as you also mentioned, both have their benefits. So I like the data-based approach to understand more like what are overall skill areas that are requested either internally, externally on the market, or are potentially available. This gives you some transparency, but most probably the learning from legends approach brings you to the core and what is really needed and makes it even more impactful. Yeah. And most probably it's a good idea to combine it. Does this bring us already into the area of skill-based learning? So what's basically, from your point of view, the difference to, let's say, normal learning?
We always learn, definitely. And we learn on the job, we learn formally with formal education. But what I think has become different is that you have at least a couple of different aspects which make it different. Because one is you have transparency. So when I think about learning something new, then now you really need to bring it down and drill it down to the different skills. For example, I'm trying to learn more to work with Adobe Premiere Pro because I'm doing a lot of videos. And now I need to, if I do a really skill-based approach, I think, okay, what are the sub-skills here, right? How do I import a video? How do I cut a video? How do I lay over some video effects? Now, that's a very simple example. But if you have complex skill sets, then making it transparent really helps to uncover where I have blind spots, right? Whereas the normal learning process usually on the job is I do it, I learn it on the job, and then I somehow manage it. And but then it's not really transparent. That's one thing I would say. And then the other thing is that it's really intentional, at least more intentional than I think when we have this learning without skill-based, where you have really thinking about from the outset, what do you need to learn and how do you learn it? And I think those two aspects are making really skill-based, whereas without the skill-based, you're rather having a general idea around it and not really bringing it down to the pieces you need.
And yeah, I also like the idea of Adobe Premiere because it's rather a complex software. So just starting with it without any idea of what are really the top 10 features that you need to know. And most probably the expert again comes in, or the legend that can bring you to the most important things. And then it would be a very broad topic that you can learn for months without improving performance, most probably, right?
And then maybe just to add one aspect as well, you have transparency and intentionality, but then you also have speed, right? You need to think about the skills shelf life that we talked about. So for example, I've seen some examples where you can create an entire series of videos without ever going outside your four walls, right? You have you can produce pictures from text prompts, then these pictures you can create into videos. And there's a YouTube channel where one guy, I think he's from the UK, has done a couple of series on videos without ever going outside. So it's alien characters, and he's giving them a face, and then there's a story. They talk about human beings, and they philosophy about what they are. It's really funny though, and he's not even using any kind of camera. And it's so skills also have a shelf life. You need to think about what you need and where you get them in terms of how long they are available, right?
Still, the concept of skill-based learning seems for me a bit abstract. Can you give some more details or examples of how it's different and what makes it a skill-based learning?
So one example I can give you is one of our customers is a large hospital in Switzerland, and they need to train their assistant physicians. And it's high stakes learning. It's also high quality learning. And you don't want to have your physician working on you or your surgeon by just having the average of the last 10 operations, surgeries, and then say, well, this would be the way I would now do it with you, right? And so they came up with a very holistic approach, and they used also the 4-dimensional framework here that we talked about from Charles Fadell, which I talked about earlier. And they said, look, we want to have skills as an essential part of that. And they started with the cognitive, the knowledge part, that they cover with adaptive learning, where adaptive learning really, really pins down the different learning objectives in a very, very granular manner. Starting from, okay, how do I prepare for a surgery? What are the single steps that I need to look at? Then how do I move into the surgery? But really granular, right? And then they also go into the skill piece or skill part where they practice the skill part, and they have direct feedback using technology where they get feedback from their mentors. And then they also track experiences, similar like pilots would track their experiences in terms of flight hours. So usually when pilots look at their experience, they sometimes, not always, but they also look at how many hours have I flown, right? And in a similar manner, they track how many experiences they have. So they collect experience points. I've done a surgery here. I get direct feedback, and in this direct feedback, I get points for well done in this area, certain area, and then I get less points for a different sub skill. So it's very granular again. And then as a whole, they collect experience points per surgery. So I think having this knowledge part and then tying it also to the skills part where we're learning not only as an event anymore, but becomes a stream of experiences where you have also purposeful or deliberate practice where you get feedback. I think that's when skill-based learning really gets born or is being effective, because the skill, you can learn a lot, and usually typically a lot of learning interventions are being regarded as an event. You do a one-time seminar, you do a workshop, you do a self-learning piece, right? But that's only event, and learning and also skill learning is not an event, right?
Yeah, and tying it really to practice is definitely something important for impactful learning. In this case, called skill-based learning, because without practice, it's just theory. And I also like the tracking of the experiences, because this basically forces people also to reflect on what happened and document it, including the feedback piece, which is definitely a very powerful part in a learning process. Definitely event-based learning is most probably not the best situation. Going through a 1 or 2 day training session and saying I'm done, this is usually not the way learning should take place. Yeah.
Definitely, and we also see that, of course, you want to make the one learning intervention as effective as possible. But then everybody who's been through an onboarding knows that there is implicit knowledge and skills, and then there is explicit knowledge and skills, right? So you have learned and read a lot, and you even did a lot of questions and answered them correctly, and you're not confident about them. But in the moment of need, that's when the real skills surface. So, and I think what is one of the challenges also for L&D, for learning development, also for HR, to really move more into that direction. But then, of course, you have large organizations that struggle by bringing it all into a skill-based, because it's a totally different approach. And we are animals of habit, so to say, right? Yeah. We're human beings, habit beings. And so changing that is much more a change process, or change culture of change, than it's buying a new technology, right?
Yeah, and I also think that key part for the example you gave, if there's a physician doing surgery, there are certain elements of habit and automation in, because they have to practice it as long enough that certain elements become automated, and reducing the risk of doing it wrong. On the other hand side, they still have to be conscious about certain things, and they should not be automated, I guess, because they should first reflect. So I think it's, most probably it's not that easy, to do this kind of training. What I was wondering is, can we always break down the skills to that level that we can train people accordingly to it? Because if there are assistant physicians, or potentially have to go through a certain standard curriculum, training, onboarding process, but there are other things that are more volatile, or where you have a smaller group of experts working on things. Would this work there as well?
That's also, in view of the fast development with AI, a very relevant question, because I think of for example, the graphic designers
Yeah.
who must have had an entire revolution in their face since GPT and since large language models and Gen AI, right? So now you can just produce new pictures. Or I've seen by Volvo, there was an entire car ad, which had been produced by AI, just adding pictures from the car, and the rest, the environment, the desert through which the car is running is entirely made by AI, right? So there are definitely more volatile areas. And interestingly enough, we had a workshop, our CEO and I was part of a workshop with a large organization here in Germany, and he gave the example of power skills. So in areas where you have a much more volatile setting, where you would rather not think about the concrete technical skills, but rather about power skills in terms of, okay, growth mindset, adaptability, or other skills where they are much more softer, thinking about how can I learn new things? How can I learn how to learn? How can I organize myself? Which are somewhat detached from the technical skills, but also, of course, have some specific connection to the different domain area, because you cannot teach someone to, let's say, handle new AI technology without telling them a little bit about how AI works. And for example, you need to at least be able to speak English, right?
Yeah.
So I've heard a lot of times that English is the new programming language. And then you need to already also know the words and the terms and the verbs to use. And these are not just primary school English, but there are some technicalities that you need to know in that language. So it's always also tied to the domain specific area. But then having these power skills, I think can be very helpful, because you need to keep thinking about how I can keep myself enabled. And this, which is part of the reason why also the two authors that I quoted today earlier, they call them enabler skills. Right?
Yeah, I would also there again say this is something similar to the concept of meta competencies, potentially, right? Future skills. You also often hear some of these terms there. So I guess there's some overlap, but yeah, investing in the skills that help you build the skills you need tomorrow is definitely a wise choice, I would say. Should we look at one of these skills, so like adaptability or learn to learn, growth mindset, how this can really be learned?
Sure. So it always starts with knowledge, right? You have to understand what these concepts are. And one of the things that I've personally benefited a lot is experts on growth mindset, experts on high performance. So just to name a few, I've benefited, for example, from Anders Ericsson's idea around peak performance. And then, of course, from Grit, Angela Duckworth, right? She's working. She's published a work on grit, what it does mean, and so there's been a very, very interesting article in Nature a couple of years ago where you had actually a study by scientists where students were reading only about growth mindset, and then it changed already their attitude, which is fascinating, right? You can just read about it, and then it changes you already to a certain extent. So getting this knowledge in a most efficient and personalized manner is one place to start. But then, of course, moving into skills, what we found very helpful is to think of project-based learning and establish certain projects with feedback, with deliberate practice, with certain limits, of course, but then you have a certain scope where you say, look, I want to practice my growth mindset. And it also must be a little bit more challenging than reading the latest newsletter on AI. It must be getting into doing something. And the more specific you can define that at the outset, it really helps you to track that. And of course, you have other elements that come from time management and self-discipline management, where you, for example, say, look, I need to do this for at least 22 days or for 60 days and keep that. And it's tiny habits where I collect, for example, where I read something about AI and I just try it. Just as a personal example, I'm getting Zain Khan's newsletter on AI every day, and he not only talks about the latest news and the greatest achievements, but also about new tools. And he links the tools, and I have made a habit of mine to just go into these tools and just test them out, how it works, what it does, and it really helps me to stay curious and also to think in terms of growing myself, because there's always this challenge of being in one job or skill area and then having this fatigue where you stop thinking and adjusting, right?
Yeah, and I really like the elements that you brought. It's on one hand side application-oriented learning. So knowledge is first. This you need, but then it's a lot on project-based, either an artificial project or even better sometimes a real project, because then you have clear deliveries and so on. And then you brought in the topic of deliberate practice, which you basically already described on a certain level before, saying do it, practice it, but also get feedback, and based on your feedback, improve again. Also very, very important concept. And then think about that building a skill takes time, and you have to repeat it over a certain period of time regularly to really make a habit out of it. So 3 very, very important elements in learning. I fully agree.
And maybe, Matthias, to add, as you summarized well, it's not so much that you need the technology for it, despite the fact that I'm working in a technology company, but it's really about this mindset of making it surface and transparent and intentional. So, for example, when I want to learn a new skill, then the moment thinking about it and thinking about the skill, what do I really want to learn? And then setting out a plan. And then all at the same time, this is kind of a balance and feel of tension, thinking about the 80-20 approach, where you say, look, I want to do this, but I don't have to do it perfect. Done is better than perfect. And you start doing it. So, for example, a part of my role is to reach out to other divisions of an organization to tell them, look, we have new technology, and this could be helpful in certain areas, the way you work, the way you learn. How interesting could this be for you, right? And so I've started doing videos, introducing myself in a 90 seconds clip, right? And I started with very bad equipment, but I've done it. And and for example, my wife, she's an architect, so she has some aesthetic abilities. And then she said, look, you have a poor sound quality. You should work on that. Or you're talking too long. And then I get feedback. So if you start until you are perfect, you will never start, right? And as Confucius famously said, every 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step, right? And I think, especially as we talked about before, skills have a shelf life. If you don't start and then you progress while you're walking, I think it's getting really difficult. So with the transparency on the one hand and the intentionality on the one hand, you also, I think, just keep moving and get into the movement, and then it will produce more movement.
Yeah, and again, it brings in the topic of application. You have to apply it early as possible, as practical as possible, and also again the feedback loop. So may it be in your case, your partner, which said, hey, your audio equipment is not good enough at all. So this as a direct feedback, or also reflection would be a self-feedback, basically. So taking time, stepping back and saying, what could I do better? What I like or dislike about it? I think the external feedback is often the better one. And also in deliberate practice, I think they say the one who gives you feedback, or the teacher basically, should be according to your own skill level. So if you are already at a very high level, you need someone who is better equipped to give you valid feedback and bring you along in the learning process. When I first thought about talking about skill-based learning, I directly connected it also in my head to skill-based organization. And then I noticed, no, he didn't say skill-based organization, but skill-based learning. How would you distinguish or maybe also combine these two terms?
I've found really helpful a definition, also a framework to work with by the two authors that I mentioned before, and maybe we can also put it in the show notes, by Ravi and by Tanush. They wrote a book last year in October, November, Skills Powered Organization. And they have a framework that they call the new organizational capabilities of a skills powered organization. And they think of skills powered organization at the core of three overlapping areas. So one is the business, one is the workforce, and one is the culture. And you have a business, of course, the business outcomes, the business KPIs like revenue and profit, and also the actual work you need to do. And it overlaps with workforce, as of course you need workforce to execute and run the business. And then you have culture, which is your workforce culture. And that overlaps also with business and workforce. So it's a Venn diagram. And at the core, where all three areas overlap, you have what they call the skill-powered organization. And when you now look at the intersections of business and workforce, they call it work design, because you really need to think new about how you structure the work. And I found it really helpful because, just to give you an example, they say, look, with the new challenges, with the new trends, with the new expectations from your employees, you need to deconstruct the jobs to identify the elemental tasks, both current and future, and then analyze also how to best combine human beings and automation with the AI part. Then you determine the best arrangement to engage talent with the work, because the workforce is coming in. And then you put it all back together, reconstruct the work. Then you have a skill-based roles or also jobs. And then you have the intersection of workforce and culture. And that's where what they call talent development, and I would call it skill-based learning at that point, where they say, look, we have defined the work design. We've defined what the work looks like today and during the next couple of years and decades. And now we need to think how we upskill, or maybe reskill our workforce in order to do that. And that's where skill-based learning comes in. So it's part of a bigger framework where at the core skill-powered or skill-based organizations sit.
And I like the idea of the diagram, because when we also look at the connection between business and workforce, where you say there's how talent meets work basically, and how they find I would say also maybe the right tasks. There are also the things like project marketplace, for example, would come into play, where you have real need to apply new skills. And I would say this is a perfect learning environment if it's connected nicely with the culture, where it's supported that people can learn the key skills. So there would be the structured learning as well as the application piece also nicely would fit together.
What I found also very interesting is that they talk around technical skills, but also enabler skills or power skills or soft skills, however you want to call them. And they say, look, the technical skills have a shrinking half-life, right?
Yes.
Because the easiest example would be visual skills or graphic design skills, right? Now you can create it with a prompt. And so they would really rethink around the underlying skills gap that could help them make the shift from the skills that they need today to the skills that they need to tomorrow. And they need to make more space for the enabler skills and AI related skills. And so this also has as a fundamental underpinning structure that you need to think about skills first, right? Otherwise, you cannot do that. And one other big part, maybe to round this up, is that it all starts with leadership. So when you talk about the skills-based or skills-powered organization, it's not for waste that they start actually with talking about leadership. What does the leadership needs to understand in terms of moving from a job-based organization to a skill-based organization, skills-powered organization, because otherwise it will just be another hype.
Yeah, I also think it's not that easy. The concept itself is not that easy to comprehend, and thinking how to apply it in a company it's not very easy. Yeah, definitely. But today we will look more at the also not easy part, but at the skill-based learning more. So I understood it's a lot about hopefully starting with knowledge acquisition, maybe adaptive if possible. Then it's a lot of application, any specific formats or things that a learning professional should look out when thinking about designing skill-based learning.
So it all starts with the taxonomy, I'd say. I've seen also in one workshop that we have with a customer that they have a lot of trainings and they have a lot of, for example, it was around a developer job and highly technical job in the IT sector. And they had an existing curriculum. But then when we went through a couple of slides from an existing webinar, which was 3 days long, we saw that you could actually break down each slide into multiple learning objectives. So, and then each learning objective has a different depth. So, for example, take Bloom's learning objective taxonomy, right? It has different levels, starting from recalling up to creative. And so really, I think it starts with high quality taxonomies. You really need to think about them and define skills along those taxonomy levels. And then you can build together different formats. And this could be, of course, self-paced learning, adaptive learning, personalized learning, which is not covering the knowledge piece, but then you have different other formats like direct feedback loops, collecting experience points after every experience that you had, getting direct feedback. So I think that would be some of the formats that you have. Also, collaborative learning, where you do project-based learning and you have different roles for a team. But still, I think starting point would be a good high-quality taxonomy where you define first what to do. And it's not a law written in stone, right?
Yeah.
As I said before, you have to move. You can lose. And it would be not surprising to me if a lot of learning development professionals say, I've done that, I've tried that before, but we have not started the project because we've lost ourselves in the middle of or in the weeds of a perfect taxonomy, right? So this is always a field of tension, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think this even reminds me on our last discussion that we had, where it was also you first have to define really the learning goals, understand what really people need to understand, recall, be able to apply, and so on. And this not necessarily dictates, but gives you a clear orientation. If you know what should be different afterwards, what is the expected outcome, gives you clearer orientation on what format to choose. Yeah, for sure. If I would be a learning professional and I want to develop my next learning activity more into the area of a skill-based learning approach, what would be things I need to learn? What should I follow? Any good practices, recommendations from you?
So one is definitely the intentionality principle. I definitely say that really asking about why you would need to learn and what you need to learn, that would be a good starting point. We've seen also a lot of examples where people are coming from the data is the best approach that we talked about before, and they have high level skill definitions. So, for example, they have a skill profile where you have different skills, and one skill is, for example, Python, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'd say one of the most important roles or tasks of a learning professional would be asking the question behind the question. So, why do you need Python first? And then, of course, if that question is answered, what does it mean to have Python, right? Can you give me some tasks with which and maybe tools to describe the skill more richly and more abundantly? Because I think what organizations, business units expect from learning professionals to give them help also in defining it more precisely to make it more a workable solution. Because you don't want to have a lot of people saying I have Python and then the only differentiation or detail they give is a rating from 1 to 5, right? So what if you have a lot of people with a rating from 4 to 5? What do you do? What does it mean? Can you use them? So, and of course, this is a great starting point. This is a great way to get things moving. And one of the examples I love from the book, from Ravi and Tanush, is that they say, look, one bank, global audience, they had a office in India, and they said, look, we want to open up a bank for deaf people who cannot hear, because they were born deaf or they have biological problems, of course, challenges. And then they said, look, we need this and this and this skill. We need to have a person who knows about what it means to be deaf. We need to have a barrier-less or barrier-free expert. And they had like 10 different skill sets, right? And it worked because all of a sudden from the organization, people came and say, I have that skill, right?
Yeah.
And it's a great way to get things moving. But then if you want to have high performing, then you need to think about more detailed, what are the skill sets? What are sub skills? What do you need to achieve? So I see the role of an L&D professional and learning professional more towards the moderator and the coordinator, the orchestrator of those questions, and then the resulting skills, than actually creating different learning paths.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely also like the idea of asking the why. Why do you need the skill and what for? Because as an example of Python, you also mentioned the 5-star scale. On for my job, I would say I have a level 4 out of 5, maybe even 5 out of 5. But if I would compare with a data scientist, you would say you are a 1 out of 5. So this also is a different scale in his mind than in my mind, for example. And in one of my last podcasts, it was about learning coaching, and the expert there said, basically this approach of learning is for performance improvement. So what's the benefit of an employee to learn Python? If I will never program anything, then it would feel like waste. There might still be a why. Maybe there will be low-code, no-code solutions in the future, and understanding why, how programming works. Python could be a good segue to support the future transformation into this area, how IT tools work, more or less. But is then Python the right approach? Maybe not. So this is already giving the solution without asking the question of the target, right? And if I will not become a programmer, maybe Python is completely wrong for me. So it's definitely going always back to the question, what's the objective? What should be different later on? And I even remember a case where a complete department here said, our employees need to become better at artificial intelligence. Full stop. So, what do you do with it?
What does that mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and how do their jobs change, or will they change? Or should they simply train anything on it? But without applying it, won't make a difference. So you really have to break it down, find out what needs to be different, and if people will have the need to apply it, because I would say most probably will not have the time to do it. and then there's no clear intention for the people. Yeah.
And as we also talked about what training formats, what a learning professional could do, right? And on the one hand, it's a very valid question because it's a relevant question. A learning professional needs to think in those terms. At the same time, with AI having a huge impact on how we learn and what technology is available, but also making skills and capabilities obsolete, because you can do it all with AI now, provocatively speaking. And then you have employees who have different expectations. It seems that learning professionals and also HR has to think more in terms of a higher level, more abstract level of supporting the business. You cannot think in terms of, oh, now I have to do this, and this is the clear answer to question A, and so I can do B, and it's a clear pathway. I think it's getting more complex. You have to adapt because what I say today could be of no valid use anymore next week, right? But if you excavate those principles who can stand the test of time, so to say, and orient and guide you, let you work guide by those principles, I think it's much more long-term and standing when it comes to the times that we're living in right now.
So the world is really changing fast these times, and what I see as an additional challenge is you mentioned, for example, some minutes ago already, a designer needs to design less today because of AI, which makes it, from my point of view, as well more difficult because they have to choose and evaluate. So it's on a different maturity level, the results that they get. Because if you're a beginner and you never created anything on your own, you will not know what good design is, most probably. It might require different kind of training, and the level of recall is not enough. They need to have really a very mature and advanced level to be able to work well with AI. But how to reach it if the AI makes the way to this level obsolete? So all the steps in between you potentially don't need anymore, but you need to jump from the beginner level directly to the expert level to be able to have highest quality results. So most probably a philosophical topic, but still something that I wonder how we will manage this in the future. Do you have any thoughts on this?
So I just want to be honest. I think it's really a step by step. We need to experiment. And I would rather be skeptical if a person says I have the answer to this question. So, for example, using picture image generating AI, and then saying, "Look, I need to train myself, and how?" But I have now found the silver bullet to reach that high quality level that you were talking about, because AI is just helping me. Is still the general principle that you need to be skilled in order to reflect on the level of skill that you have achieved, which ties back into or pays back into the skill of into the deliberate practice idea. Is still valid, right? Even with AI, technology has not changed that. So, for example, if I want to learn how to do great podcasts, and now I'm using the AI to create a podcast for me with a topic, I still cannot judge whether I'm a good podcaster or this has been a great podcast. I have to go back to Matthias and say, look, what do you think? And of course, AI could tell me and do the job of Matthias giving me feedback, but still, it could be that one, the AI is not really well in doing that, or I cannot still understand the feedback given by the AI, right? So I think there's still a human element. And of course, one of the bold promises of AI providers or about AI would be Yes, but the more AI learns, the better it becomes like a coach, and replaces the legend from which I can learn. And I'm a bit more doubtful on that.
And again, maybe it will be a coach for the very beginners, but for the very experienced level, you most probably again need the legends. Yeah, good perspective. Yeah. Looking a bit at the time, maybe one last question, at least one last question. Do you see limitations for skill-based learning? So areas where you should not apply them, where it doesn't make sense, where you have seen it, don't know, fail?
I would not see any limitations. I would see limitations, not limitations per se, but what I've seen so far is that you have a lot of organizational limits, or limits in terms of the way and the impact an organization can have. From this year's LinkedIn Learning report, it said that only 2% of the big scale projects really moved forward when it came to projects related to upskilling, reskilling, because it seems that you want to boil the ocean, and then you start with great hope and vision for your organization. You want to do something good, but then it quickly fades because an organization is not your own personal team or even your own personal life, which is still difficult to do, much more difficult an organization. So I can foresee, or what we've seen so far is a lot of fatigue, frustration, because it's so overwhelming. And so I've seen a lot of experts also recommend that you start small with a pilot, with a proof of concept, with an early adopter team, and then you scale it from there. But also do not expect that just because you have a great pilot, it will just scale by itself, right? You have to manage expectations. You have to communicate very well. So it's rather a organization psychological topic rather than having to do with skill-based learning itself.
Yeah. And you have to find the right project, the right sweet spot where you can show real impact and make a big difference. So to convince basically the organization, right, to move more into this direction. Yeah, good approach.
And maybe one practical example, we had a client from the aviation space where they train people who need to guide pilots and also guide planes. And they say, look, we are a high stake organization, right? We need to make sure that people have the capabilities. So, and then we talked with them about skills and how to use technology to do that. And we piloted. It was a great pilot. But then still, they said, look, we as an organization, we're not ready for that. We need to do some other things first. We need to get better buy-in from the management. And that's totally fine, because it's like starting with a car without any wheels, right? You have the engine, but it's not working. It's not rolling. And you want to avoid that.
Yeah, good point. Before I come to the closing questions, which question would you ask yourself about the skill-based learning? So which question did I miss, basically?
One thing that I'm wondering sometimes is how learning and development or learning professionals are actually in their day-to-day lives using the concept of skills and also using technology for that. Because since I think 1.5, 2 years, everybody's talking about skill-based learning, skill-powered learning. And so really would love to see examples of where the rubber meets the road, where it's really having an input, an outcome, an output, also business related, because you can do almost everything on a PowerPoint slide, or even with some nice technology. But technology is only an enabler, and not the one doing it themselves, right?
Good question. And what would be your thought on it, on the answer?
I'm leaning towards the lower end of the answer, which is probably that we're talking a lot about skills based, but we're still hanging around the block of traditional learning, which is not as granular, as skill defined as it should be in order to be workable. So I have the feeling that we're moving ahead with our words and trading with our actions.
Yeah. And this leads me to the first closing question. So I as it's here about learning professionals, learning development departments. So what would be one wish or the one small change you would love to make in the L&D world in companies today? So what could be a first good step for this marathon to run and become more a skill-based learning organization? So what could be the first steps I can do today or tomorrow?
So I would answer with a quote by Christopher Lind, who is a learning expert that I like to follow on LinkedIn and his blog posts. And he said around also the hype around AI, that the vast majority of problems we see happening with AI, and I would say also with skills, would be solved if the leaders or L&D professionals, I would say, making the decision about it, critically examine themselves and the problems they're trying to solve in the mirror, and invited constructive and diverse opinions into their decisions. So technology is never the problem, he says. It always comes back to the people. And then he says, solve for the people, then identify where technology can enhance or augment your solutions, and you'll prosper. And I'd say definitely it works for skills as well. So first, think about the needs that the people have, and really tie it to business related outcomes, and then think from there towards skills ontologies and concepts, and then of course technology, but not technology first, because nowadays we have a lot of technology vendors offering to use also the AI element inside that technology to make life easier, which is part of the equation. But if you start with that, it always backfires.
Define the problem well, right? So define the problem first, find out what is really the problem, the source, before you go into the solution. Don't start with the solution. And AI might be part of the solution, but define the problem, find out the why before. Yeah, very good. And the last question, as always, I love books. What would be your book recommendation?
So we have already cited and talked a bit about it. I recommend Skills Powered Organization by Ravin Jesuthasan and Tanush Kapilashvami. They have a very nice overview of why skills are needed, and also questioning why jobs and roles are a thing of the past, looking into the future. Then they have also some very, very interesting and helpful approaches around a skills-based organization, where skill-based learning is an element of that.
I haven't had this book yet on my table, so definitely will go into my reading list. And with this, I would say thank you that you joined the Learning Explorer podcast and shared your insights on skill-based learning with us, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.